everybody. Welcome back to the channel. This is Eden Mabon of LightCycleAstrology.com. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and happy Monday. Today we are talking about a stellium that forms in the sign of Pisces. A stellium is whenever you get a bunch of planets in one sign, two or more planets. Typically, people describe it when 3 planets enter a sign. Of course, we have Saturn has moved into the sign of Pisces as of last Tuesday. So technically we have 4 planets in the sign of Pisces. But what happens, as we'll see in a moment when I pull up the real-time clock, is that 3 of those planets come together in the same degree in Pisces, and they simultaneously all form a square to the planet Mars in the sign of Gemini. So, wow, what a powerful moment. I think that this could be one of the biggest moments for astrology of 2023, but definitely this is the biggest moment this week going forward. So we're going to take a look at that and provide some kind of meaning or delineation to that. We're going to add some meaning to the Friday video that we did for the Sun square to Neptune, because that was part of the stellium that was forming as of last Friday. So, of course, whenever you try to interpret a bunch of planets together, it isn't so easy, but we're just going to take it one little step at a time. So if you missed Friday's video, go ahead and watch that, and that'll catch you up to the basic themes that we're adding to today. Okay, now before we get into today's content, please like and share the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That really helps push the algorithm forward. You can always hit the notification bell so you don't miss a video. I make videos these days, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, because my schedule is so packed. So those are the days that you can find videos that I release. But if you if you're like me and you're busy, you can always hit that notification bell, and then it just pops up, and then you can see what's going on out there in the heavens. Okay, let's go ahead now and pull up the real-time clock and take a look at what has been going on in the sign of Pisces. It has been quite a lot. So as of last Tuesday, March the 7th, we saw Saturn ingress into the sign of Pisces. This is a big new transit that we're going to be experiencing over the next 2.5 years. And of course, we talked about that last week. And ever since Tuesday, we're watching now 3 of the planets move closer and closer together. So the last planet in the sign of Pisces, or the latest planet in the sign, is Neptune. But Neptune is such a slow moving planet that it's really easy for Mercury and the Sun to catch up to Neptune. Saturn's too slow to join the exact stellium party, but he's still co-present. So you do interpret Saturn also giving influence to the stellium as well. Now, if we roll forward by days here, we see that by last Saturday, the Sun begins to engage Mars by square. So that's the video that I did last Friday, was talking about that. I didn't want to overwhelm the interpretation, but trying to bring in Neptune and Mercury right then, because Mercury by this point is about 5 degrees away from the Sun. The Sun is about 4 degrees away from Neptune. So probably around Monday, a couple of days after the weekend, today here, we begin to see these 3 planets really getting very, very close to each other. And I think this is when you're going to begin to really notice this energy. And of course, it's a lot of planets. So you're sort of pulling in and trying to blend or synthesize all 4 of these energies together. And of course, that isn't so easy to do. It's not too difficult to blend 2 planets together and sort of get an idea or a blending of energies that you can sort of come up with. But once you bring in 3, it gets to be quite difficult. And of course, again, you could always sort of add in Saturn there. But what begins to happen that is really profound is that as we roll on further into this week, we see that by Thursday, we see that this is actually pretty interesting. You see, here's Mercury at 23 degrees, the Sun at 24 degrees this Wednesday, but between Wednesday and Thursday, at some point, both the Sun and Mercury overcome Neptune and pass by Neptune in the sky. So that is probably where we're going to notice the most potent or powerful moments of the archetypal energies related to these planets here. That would be my best guess anyway. And then what happens is that we also have to sort of keep in mind that two of these planets in this 3-planet stellium are the Sun and Mercury. And so we're also talking about a Mercury synodic reset here. And what I mean by that is, of course, Mercury is orbiting the Sun. Mercury is the first planet that orbits the Sun in the solar system. So it orbits the Sun very quickly, about 4 times a year to our 1 time a year that we do here on Earth. And that's what we're seeing right now in the sky is, from our perspective on Earth, we're seeing Mercury and the Sun come together in the same degree. And in ancient astrology, the Hellenistic astrologers of the ancient period, they gave this moment where Mercury and the Sun coming together in the same degree represented a kind of death and rebirth for Mercury. One of the reasons that they ascribed that kind of signification to this is because Mercury being so close to the Sun in the sky loses visibility. The Sun is too bright to see Mercury as a planet star, essentially. So this period where Mercury sort of moves out of visibility as its own independent star, and then gets closer and closer to the Sun, that period between the exact moment of the Mercury and the Sun conjunction was thought to be the period that Mercury sort of symbolically goes into the underworld and dies. Now we see that if we go forward 1 day on into Friday, there comes Mercury on the other side of the Sun passing over. So while Mercury is still invisible in the sky because it's still really, really close to the Sun, this is the moment that the ancients ascribed a metaphysical meaning of thinking about Mercury having been reborn. Typically, this is called a cazimi in Hellenistic astrology. So this cazimi moment between Mercury and the Sun is really powerful. But what makes it so much more powerful this time around, because we get these about 3 or 4 times a year, what makes this one in particular very powerful is that Mercury does not really like to be in the sign of Pisces. Now, if you have Mercury natally in the sign of Pisces, I don't want to, bum you out and make it sound like you have like this terrible Mercury. But essentially, the way that the language tries to get at what this means, archetypally speaking, is just to say that there's a very interesting quality where Mercury is opposite to one of the temples that he rules. Mercury is the ruler of the sign Gemini and the sign of Virgo. So Mercury being in Pisces is opposite to the sign of Virgo. And in ancient astrology, Mercury is in his own domicile in Virgo and is also in the sign of his exaltation. So what it is getting at is that when Mercury travels through the entire sign of Pisces, that's a moment where he's essentially as far from his own natural significations or nature as he could possibly be. In one sense, it's like Mercury is in a foreign land and doesn't know how to speak the language of Pisces. So it's not that you can't have a really amazing Mercury natally in the sign of Pisces. It makes you very intuitive, and that's really, really good. But for the most part, Mercury is a planet that gets at the archetypal symbolism of how we dissect things mentally, how we communicate in a rational manner. And so you get a much more intuitive you get a much more intuitive kind of Mercury in the sign of Pisces. And this is one of the delineations that ancient astrologers gave to this designation of Mercury in Pisces. So um, another designation was to be in the sign opposite to where Mercury is said to be exalted. So this gives us a kind of interpretation where if Mercury is running through the sign of its depression, or the sign where it is fallen, because that's sort of the opposite of exaltation, right? Exaltation means that a planet is lifted up very high, is celebrated and important. We get a Mercury now that is somehow being represented as brought down quite low. So a fallen planet really only has one place to go. It's like saying you've hit rock bottom, and the only thing you can do is sort of come back up. So these are some of the indicators that we get from Mercury when he runs through the sign of Pisces. It's like he's in a foreign land, doesn't quite know the language or how to speak or communicate in a way that he naturally does. He has to learn how to do it in kind of a different way. But also it's like he's as low as he could be, and he's going to have to struggle and work against fate or fortune to try to rise back up to a place of where he feels comfortable in expressing himself or his significations. So that's a big deal, just Mercury running through the sign of Pisces. But to go through a death at the same time, you're already low, and it's like you're crashing through the underworld out of visibility with the sun, metaphorically going through a death and rebirth. That's a really interesting moment. Another interesting thing is that Mercury is forming a square to Mars. Mercury is the host of Mars in his other sign here in Gemini. So this is just a lot of things to try to pull into some kind of meaningful interpretation. But essentially, the fact that Mercury goes through this cazimi, death and rebirth kind of moment in the sign of his fall. One thing that I did notice just in passing was, I don't know if you guys noticed this as well, but I forget the bank name, but there was a huge story over the weekend about how a very, very large and prominent bank in the state of California went under. And there was almost like a Great Depression 1929 run on the bank where people were trying to get their money out, and the bank had limited how much money you could pull from an account if you had an account at that bank. Well, that's what we saw during the late 1920s. So very, very interesting. Now, if you go back and watch the video I did on what Saturn is like in the sign of Pisces, the last time that Saturn was in this Pisces, not the last time, but 3 times ago, was a period that was about 1935, when we do see the Great Depression in full swing. So one of the things that I sort of went into a little bit was that I wonder if we're going to see mercurial things this time around, with Saturn moving into the sign of Pisces, become low and struggling. Now, I'm just using the language of the ancients to describe what Mercury may be like this time around. But I think that I could definitely say that that was a pretty successful call, to say that things that are Mercury related, such as markets or banks or exchanges or merchants, anything mercurial in nature, going through the sign of its fall. You see a big bank fall over the weekend, just as it's coming close to this stellium. I think that was a very a good example of sometimes how you see some of these archetypal themes come out and manifest out in the world. So I'm going to say that one was a pretty successful interpretation. That being said, once we get to this Friday, Mercury is technically reborn now. And so there are definitely some things that we can interpret about that. So from that point forward, a rebirth of Mercury means that Mercury begins to slowly recover. And then as we go forward, Mercury will enter the sign of Aries by this coming Sunday. And that's definitely a moment where Mercury moves out of the sign of Pisces and picks up some dignity. He is still invisible until he gets about 15 degrees away from the sun, but that doesn't take long. So after essentially this Thursday or Friday, mercurial things begin to improve. So that's one thing that we're going to interpret today as we're talking about the stellium is definitely this powerful moment of this cazimi. Cazimis typically represent thematically some kind of aha moment where things sort of begin to make sense. But I wonder, how much do things make sense in this particular cazimi, as you also have Neptune very, very close to the sun and Mercury at the same time? Because we all know that Neptune is a planet that sometimes or oftentimes makes things a little bit cloudy and murky. So that's one thing to take into consideration with the stellium that is taking place. So a very powerful stellium. And of course, all three of these planets are forming this square over to Mars in Mercury's sign, and we have Saturn in the mix. So that is what is happening this week. Now, let's go ahead. I'm going to share with you some of my themes. Okay, so now there are a few possible themes. Now, of course, again, once we try to interpret so many planets coming together, it gets really, really hard, but we're going to take a stab at it. Now, there are probably almost an infinite amount of ways in which you could come up with themes because there are so many planetary energies forming together in one sign at the same time. But these are just a few quick and easy ones that may be applicable here. Theme number one is going to be a change in direction, motivation, or ambition that comes into conflict with the momentum of the past actions or of your past actions. Yeah, that's because we are talking about one of the things that is happening in this stellium is that sun square to Mars. So could the sun, being a representation of an image or motivation or ambition that is sort of filtering through the sign of Pisces, making some kind of square over to Mars. You know, Mars is going pretty fast right now in the sign of Gemini. And I get the sense that he's sort of chugging along and he's got his own momentum. He's sort of barreling down the tracks, doing what he is doing. And now here comes the sun moving into a square with Mars. And it makes me wonder if with Neptune and Mercury there going through sort of like an aha cazimi moment and Neptune heightening the imagination, it makes me wonder if there just isn't a big, bold moment that comes along and says, wow, well, we're already sort of doing this thing, but what if we start doing this, you know? And that, I think, could be why you get a square between the stellium and Mars. The square could represent something that brings in a kind of tension or stress or conflict between the two areas in the chart. And so it makes me think that is something stressful. Do you have some burst of intuition or insight with the cazimi, with the sun, with Neptune, and this this almost like infinite horizontal imagination that sort of comes into the mix with the sun and Mercury there? Is that sort of welling up or drawing in an image that, inspires you or motivates you or gives you some picture of what you could be doing? But with the square, is that representing, well, this isn't really in line with what is already happening now? So that is theme one that I wonder about for this particular moment. Theme two, when spirit dominates muscles, but then you add in the cazimi of Mercury to the sun and Neptune. Do you bite off more than you can chew, but not more than you can imagine? Neptune may weaken the brawn side of the equation, and the cazimi might heighten the spiritual side. The square here may represent some amount of frustration in striking the right balance of ambition to ability. Right, so we're just sort of turning the dynamic just a little bit Here, it makes me think that on the one hand, you have Mars and Gemini sort of representing the muscles, right? He's a man of action. He's got all the power and strength, and he is in great speed, right? He's running through Mercury's sign, and that's making him very agile, quick, and capable. He's just very decisive and quick and capable. And, of course, Mars doesn't like to really, he doesn't like to slow down that much and think about it. He really just wants to get things done. This makes me wonder if the spirit being in that dominant to the right placement in the square dynamic, if that spirit bringing in the cazimi of Mercury, giving you that aha moment, and of course, again, the expansive horizontal theme that Neptune often brings to the table, it makes me wonder if you just simply bite off more than you can chew. It's like there's so much inspiration that you just overwhelm something, and the square may represent the frustration that comes with trying to figure out what can you do versus what can you imagine. And so maybe this is just a moment where we become frustrated in the fact that we can't do everything we want to do. I think that is possibly another thing that we could see with this stellium making a square to Mars. Okay, theme number 3, inflexible, fanatical, arrogant, a sort of I know best demeanor or attitude that is unbending or gives unbending ideological viewpoints that cause some kind of discord or argument, etc. And we add in the cazimi and the Neptune, and maybe we're talking about getting swept up in a moment that feels like you're part of something really, really big, that we have come to save someone or maybe everyone. Yet this is sort of almost that puffed up, inflated feeling where the stellium sort of grabs us, and all of a sudden we feel like it's like, hey, I'm going to make everything okay. I'm going to save everybody. It has this very powerful spiritual dimension there with Neptune. It has the incredible intuitive moment of the cazimi from Mercury in the sign of Pisces conjoining the sun. And the cazimi in ancient astrology was sort of talked about as almost being the messenger of the king, or having the power to deliver some kind of kingly message. So you get the sense that maybe more on the shadow side, there is kind of this fanatical or inflexible energy. You have Saturn now in the sign of Pisces, kind of that arrogance that Jupiter sometimes is known for, a kind of over the top, like I know better than everybody. I'm going to come in and be the savior of something. That could be something that creeps into the moment, and it's like all of a sudden you just feel like you're Superman. But maybe that's like over embellished to some degree, and you have to wonder, is everything clear enough to the point where you know exactly who wants help? Or what should we try to help? What can we help? Sometimes, it's sort of a question of like that, like what can we possibly help? How much can we possibly fix? Maybe, on the positive side, there are things that we could fix. So I don't want to say, don't go with the energy if you feel like you should really step in and maybe handle something that you feel like you can fix. But I guess there's just a little bit of the danger of maybe just taking it a little bit too far. And Neptune, it's sort of making it a little bit hard to know where the limit is, know where the boundaries are, know where people's, space is, and what is your space. Neptune is an archetypal energy that tends to, dissolve some of those things that are usually easier to see. So bring in the sort of fanaticism, bring in the inflexibility of Saturn now in this sign. And I think you get the mix. That's kind of an interesting angle on this stellium in the sign of Pisces. Okay, theme number 4, a crisis of faith or a restoration of faith that helps you find the courage to overcome an obstacle. A bigger picture emerges, sort of giving you a 20,000-foot view clarity, the cazimi there, but with Neptune and freshman Saturn. Do we become overwhelmed by too much information? There could be a psychedelic rebalancing between manic and depressive, pessimism and disillusionment, throwing in the towel, or chasing after fool's gold. This one gives me that sense of like bouncing back and forth between this one. I'm really trying to pull in Saturn a bit more here into the mix, but sort of bouncing back and forth between the pessimism and the loss of hope that you get when Saturn runs through a Jupiter ruled sign. And then also maybe some of the disillusionment of Neptune. So this one, you're sort of teetering like at the top of the sky, and you have this amazing view. You have this amazing intuition. You have the very genius, intuitive quality of Saturn in this sign now. And it makes me wonder if it isn't just you're just standing on a very, very small space up there in the sky. And that can be an amazing view, right? It can be that eagle's view that really gives you something that you don't normally get to have. But of course, we are not eagles for the most part, and there's a danger of a fall from that. So I definitely get a sense of danger with Neptune and Saturn together. There's a little bit of treachery there. So I think you just have to watch out for maybe that sort of fool's gold, bouncing back and forth between hopelessness and thinking that everything is possible, kind of the extremes of that. So most of the time most of us won't have the extremes of this, but if this is doing something in your natal birth chart and it really grabs you, that's where maybe you could see a little bit more of the extremes of this. Okay, and then we have theme number 5, the last one here that we're building upon from Friday is knowledge over action, adding in the cazimi and Neptune, and we may be inspired by creative, soft, gentle, empathetic speeches, proclamations, or announcements on behalf of noble ideals or truth, kind of like a Tony Robbins seminar. I mentioned this name to my wife. I said, I wonder if this stellium making a square to Mars gives you that kind of Tony Robbins feeling, like going to a Tony Robbins seminar. And she was like, who's that? So Tony Robbins is arguably the most famous motivational. He's like the OG life coach. I wish I had a picture of him. I should have prepared one, but he's a really charismatic, tall. He has big hands. He's just very charming. He has a very glittery kind of almost like Saturn and Neptune kind of a voice that really almost it captivates you. And he was like the OG. He's the guy that comes in and just gives you the most like hopeful, positive, magical way of feeling better about yourself, getting you motivated, giving you positive like types of messages that are like, hey, knock it off. Stop feeling this bad about yourself. Like nobody needs that. Just, remember that you're a good person. You have a value. Why couldn't you be chasing your dreams and being successful just as much as anybody else? He sort of comes in and gives you that inspiration. So I'm wondering if you have Mars chugging down the tracks, doing his own thing. And here comes a moment that is incredibly inspirational and has the qualities of being like really creative, of course, in the sign of Pisces, this very creative energy, but also is sort of soft with Neptune there, gentle, very empathetic. And maybe there comes along somebody that sort of embodies this energy that's sort of giving you proclamations or speeches, some kind of announcement that comes along. Could be a boss, could be a friend, could be a relative, could be a loved one. Anybody that comes along is just sort of like Tony Robbins for you at that moment. So that's theme number 5 is like angling towards forms of self-improvement, maybe pulling in a little bit of that Mars square that is frustrated about the things that we don't know, the knowledge that we don't have yet that we need to take time and learn. I'm sort of wondering about if that is the frustrating part about theme number 5. You're sort of inspired, but it's like then you're coming face to face with, what don't I know that I need to know that is going to help me put my plan into action, do what it is that I'm here to do, be the best version of myself I can be. It's like you get all this inspiration, but then you have to face the fact that there's work to be done. And of course, right, there's always work to be done. Okay, guys, so that's what I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. On Wednesday, we are going to do a video on all 12 rising signs. We're going to make a horoscope video and bring this stellium, making a square to Mars, into the natal birth charts according to your rising sign. So come back for Wednesday for that one. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Until then, take care of each other, and leave me a comment in the comment section if you liked today's video, and maybe if you have some ideas on what the stellium could be like, some archetypal combinations, or if you notice any ways in which this seems to appear in your life. Okay, guys, I'll be back again on Wednesday. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Bye.